Thank you. God. Remember I helped you? This is God's name, the Tetragrammaton, as it's called in English. Shem Havaya, the special name of God that we do not pronounce it the way it's written. Adeshem. We pronounce Amonai. Has a yud, a hey, a vav, and a hey. The divine presence of God is embodied in this name. The divine attributes, godliness, is exemplified in this name. The yud being divine wisdom, the hey being divine knowledge or understanding, bina, chachma and bina. They come together and flow through the funnel of das to become 6 divine emotions. And the final letter is Malchus, divine royalty. This name is the source of creation. It is bound up with God in a oneness, the light and the vessel of this name, that it is vested in it the power to create something from nothing. Welcome to Tanya Today. I'm Rabbi Ronnie Fine, coming to you from Chabad Zichron Kadeshim in Montreal, Canada, where it's a privilege and a pleasure to share with you the Tanya. We continue in the 20th letter. This letter is a unique letter. Firstly, it was written just a few days before the Alter Rebbe passed away in 1812. And it speaks about the uniqueness of creation, of the materiality of this world. Till this letter, we approached materiality, that it is a function or it is a product of the divine will of God that is through klipa, a shell that's covering over. The name of God is hidden in the materiality, and through using the material in the appropriate way, we can elevate it. Elevate the sparks that are hidden in the shell, and elevate those godly sparks to a higher, exalted, holier place in the divine order of things. This letter comes to explain a deeper, more profound notion of the material physical world, that it is a product of God himself by means of godliness, through godliness, the name Havaya, the Tetragrammaton, that it is through it bound up with the infinite of God, and therefore has a very special place, being that it's bound up. It's not so much about the klipa that's covering the shell, that's covering over the divine nutrients and energy inside, but this is about the creation of it itself, direct from the Ein Sof of Hashem. And that's where we're going with this. But in this conversation, which is a lengthy conversation, a lengthy letter, we're now at the point of understanding that, yes, it's vested in the name of Avaya, right? But to break it down further, the letter Vav, which is the divine emotions, this is the quality of where Torah comes from. Where Torah or expresses itself here, and mitzvahs expresses itself here in divine royalty. Divine royalty, right? So, which means on this level, on a revealed level, since the letter Vav comes before the Hey, Torah is greater than mitzvahs. Excuse me. Again, why? Because Torah comes from a higher place in the divine order of things. This letter comes before, right? The Hey. Emotions, which this is emotions, divine emotions, come before your speech, right? What do you talk about? Well, those things that you have a feeling towards, right? So what causes what? Emotions causes your thought and your speech, which means emotions are greater, right? They precede. Is that clear? Okay. Yet that's on a revealed level. The source, the root, though, of mitzvahs is in Kesser, the crown, which is actually not even on the name. It's that part which is pointing upwards as the crown is on top, right? That it's pointing towards that the letter Yud. That's where mitzvahs come from, because in Kesser, in the crown, you have Erachampin, the divine will, and that's the source of mitzvahs, the will of God. This, right, which metaphorically in the is called Golgotha, which literally means skull, because the skull encompasses the meichin, the brain. Right. Now, Torah merely issues from supernal Chochmah, which is the Yud, but the way the Yud is in Kesser means meichin, brain. So skull is over the brain. So for the metaphor of understanding, the root source of mitzvahs is higher and greater than the root source of Torah. So we have a paradox over here. On the revealed level, Torah is greater because it comes from the Vav, right? The letter that precedes, where mitzvahs come from, the Hey. So Torah is greater. Hence, Torah elucidates the mitzvah. Right? How do we know what a mitzvah is? Because only the Torah tells us. Therefore, it's greater. It's elucidating it. But in its root source, in other words, that's on the revealed level, on the level of where it emerges from, which is Kesser, the divine crown, beyond God's name. So there's different dimensions there in the crown. Mitzvahs are Erachampin, divine will, which metaphorically is the skull, right? And which encompasses the brain, meaning greater than the brain in the metaphor. And Torah comes from the brain in Kesser, if you will, the Meichen in Kesser, which means it's a lower level. So how do we understand this? Well, he gives a metaphor of a stamp. that engraves a seal. The part that is protruding as a part that's indented on the stamp, the part that makes a protrusion is protruded, makes an indentation, makes something indented, right? So the part that is protruding, so in other words, it does the exact opposite of what it is, right? That's a paradox we see in the physical, right? The protrusion makes the indentation. The indentation makes the protrusion. So the exact opposite of what it is. So that's a metaphor for us to understand this concept. Yet that doesn't give us understanding of it gives us um, uh, a physical indication on how this plays itself out. But how do we understand this in concept? Well, this is the idea of Noitz Chilos Misofan, that the beginning is wedged in the culmination. The beginning is wedged in the culmination. What does that mean? In the beginning, the power of the Ein Sof, right, to create something from nothing, not through cause and effect, but something from nothing, right, that there should be a yesh, that there should be a something. Something means a distinct entity that has independence, right? And that's in order that ultimately that independent being should recognize that there is a king, because a king can only be over separate beings. You're not a king over your fingers. You're not a king over your children, because your children are not really separate from you. They're part of you, right? So over separate beings, right? So where will that be expressed itself? That God is king through following his command, right? The command of the king. Well, what's the command of the king? It's the commandments to do whatever the action mitzvah is. So the original intent, the higher place in Kesser, right, which is the skull, then which is an indentation, protrudes down here in a lower way, deeper down here in the material, not in the spiritual of Torah teachings, but in a deeper place, because that's the final intent, because God desires to be a king. And a king can only be over separate entities. So it's going to express itself in separate entities that Malchus is the source of that, right? Kingship means that there is a separate entity to the king that can willfully choose to have the king be their king, to reign over them. Not a despot, but a king, a real proper king, right? That is chosen by the person. So you need that selfhood. Well, that's what Malchus creates. And not only does it create it in the person, but it also then in the divine order of things is the source of the mitzvah. And therefore, it's through the act of the command of the physical act of the mitzvah that you will then submit to the king. That's the intended purpose. And this is the idea of my Soif Ma'aseh b'machshava tchila, that the mitzvahs and the performance of the with physical objects of mitzvahs was the original thought of God. God's original thought, right, is the physical world with physical acts of mitzvahs. Right? It's a phone. Yeah. So, thank you. Right. The original thought of God, what was he thinking? Mhm. He was thinking he wants to have a physical world with physical objects, with people that are separate from him, that they will take themselves together with the physical objects that are separate, that have a sense of separateness from God, right? Because they're created yesh mi'ayin, something from nothing, right? Cause and effect. You know, when I blow and you feel it in the back of your neck, and you know the cause of that feeling because I blew, right? If the wind blows strong enough, as the hurricanes have been, you know the source of where it's coming from, cause and effect. Oh boy. The point, the metaphor over here being that you appreciate, or I don't know, appreciate's the right word when it comes to a hurricane, but you're aware at least of the cause. We're not aware of the cause of me, the cause of the materiality of this world. We're not aware of it until we learn Tanya, of course. Now we're becoming aware of it. But other we're not aware. It just is. I just am. Right? Maybe God created, way back, but I just am now. And and that's what God wanted, that we should have that feeling so we could submit ourselves to that. I'm not just I am, but I am committed to the King. And it's not just that me, but the material world likewise. So it comes from nothingness of God, and therefore that's what we feel. And we don't sense that the source. Don't experience the source. We're not aware of the source. Again, intuitively. Talking about intuitively, right? You're intuitively aware of the source. That if I blow on the back of your neck and I'm standing right behind you, that you know that it's me, right? Whether you like it or not. The hurricane, whether you like it or not, you're aware of the source, right? And here we're not. With this, we understand then with the opinion that one interrupts their Torah study in order to fulfill the commandment of Lulav. Lulav and Esther. Why? Because the commandment is the ultimate purpose and not the Torah study. Moreover, the Talmud tells us, Rabbi Yochanan teaches us that someone who's got the intention to learn Torah, like we're doing now, learning Tanya, but your intention is not to practice. It's just like the idea in theory. Whatever I can take out of it for whatever purposes that I have, but not to practice. In other words, for a Jew not to do the mitzvahs, 613, for a non-Jew not to do 7 nochad, right? So it says better for that person that his afterbirth should have been turned over. Otherwise, he shouldn't have been born, but the metaphor is that afterbirth turned over. Well, why just say better not to be born? Why do you have to say the afterbirth? Well, because in this, there's a metaphor, of course. The afterbirth was formed first by the seminal drop, right? And for the beginning, it was the essential substance of the embryo, right? In the end, it's only the afterbirth. In other words, in the beginning, it was greater. It was the essence of right? Because it's the first thing that comes from the seminal seed. But in the end, it's just, something, the afterbirth you throw out, right? Keep the child, but not the afterbirth, right? Um, so meaning it's the lowest thing. That's the metaphor over here, because you took from the highest purpose, right? And which is the intent of God, the original thought, which is a material world, people that are separate from God in this material world, and taking that separateness and connecting to God through the mitzvah. And and you're not doing the mitzvah. So better you be like the afterbirth that you throw it away. In other words, it's analogous to the whole point over here, right? The sages didn't say better you weren't born. If you just learn and don't fulfill and do the mitzvahs, just shouldn't have been born because you're missing the point. But it's saying you're better that your afterbirth turned over, meaning because the afterbirth is the first thing that's created and it's the last thing, in fact, right? It's the last thing to come. It's after the birth, right? It's the last thing, like mitzvahs. It's the first thing in the thought of God, and it's the last thing that we do because it's action with a material world, engaging with a physical thing in the material world, with a pair of, hides from an animal that you make a mezuzah, you make a tefillin, a palm branch for a lulav, and so on and so forth. So so of course, in the end, what comes out over here is that in this metaphor, there's the internal and the external. The internal mitzvahs are higher, Torah is lower. The external Torah is higher, and mitzvahs are lower. Torah is ethereal. It explains the mitzvah, right? So therefore greater than the mitzvah because it's explaining it in that respect. But yet, um, and the mitzvah is done with a material physical world. Um, which is separate from God, right? And it's as opposed to Torah is not separate from God, it's God's wisdom. But that was the original thought and the original intent. Very powerful. I hope that was clear. It was. I hope that was clear. Okay, so Kunyat. Can we say then that as of creation of the world, God used Torah as a blueprint, and maybe for the creation of Torah, he used mitzvahs as a blueprint. Very good. Yeah, so this is where we get the notion, thank you for that, that Torah becomes a blueprint of creation, right? How? Because it's a divine wisdom. The divine wisdom that becomes what God uses as to map the plan of creation. Because God creates through his divine name. And the Vav in the divine name, as we said, is reference to Torah. And the Hey is to mitzvahs. So it becomes then the blueprint, the brains, if you will, of creation. Meaning, embedded in all of creation is a divine mind, which is aligned with the Torah principles and Torah teachings. Even though it might not look that way as we perceive the world. But if we look more deeply, we will see that everything in the physical or in the makeup of creation, it's aligned to Torah teachings and Torah principles and Torah values, which means the opposite, that the world is based on Torah values. It's the DNA of creation, right? And and what yeah, and on its root source, the Torah is there to be that DNA of creation in order that we use creation, the physical world, based on the Torah teachings and Torah commandments to engage with it, to reveal um, the godliness thereof. Yeah, thank you. Very good. Any other questions? All righty. Wonderful. To be continued, of course. Right. I'm Rabbi Ronnie Fine, coming to you for Chabad Zich and Kedoshim Montreal, Canada. It's a privilege and a pleasure to share with you the Tanya. Today is October 7th. October 7th has many strong feelings, many painful feelings, many feelings that can produce anger. But ultimately, what it should produce, as we learned over here, the original thought is the final act. The original thought of God is the fulfillment of his commandment in the material world. So today would be a day for a Jew to put on film with another Jew, do the act of the mitzvah. Would be a time to give more charity. Again, a physical act with physical material money. And with that money, we could buy our own sustenance. We can buy things that are a pleasure for me. And we now use that. But the original intent to for the mitzvah. But that is the way to commemorate October 7th. Not to be caught up in our heads or in our hearts, but with the act of a mitzvah. So let's all resolve that today and henceforth, but starting today, that the way we respond, of course, in the act of evil, you need to put down the evil. Of course, no question about that. We're not talking about if you're a soldier in the IDF or that you have a responsibility for security for Jewish community today, which is the community is on high alert. Because it's not just Hezbollah and Hamas evildoers, but there's people in every country that go and protest It's also an evil act. Most of them are ignorant, um, out of ignorance, but it's a vile thing. The protest against, protest free Palestine and from the river to the sea. So, yes, whoever is in a position to eradicate the evil, that's their job. But the greater place we have is to bring another mitzvah, the act of saying that this world where people feel so separate from their divine source, the material world, which naturally we look at it as being separate from God. Yeah, you might believe that God created it, but you don't sense its connection, at least naturally. And now you're taking a physical hide of an animal for a pair of tefillin, or, taking money that can be used for your own physical welfare, and you're giving it to charity. That's bringing new light into this world, illuminating a dark world, and changing the world for good and bringing final redemption.